45,000 seats, an official attendance that claims nearly every one of them was filled.
It's quite a scene here at Estadio Guadalajara.
And yet, when the cameras cut wide during South Korea against the Czech Republic on the opening day of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, entire sections of the Estadio Akron in Guadalajara were empty. Rows and rows of red plastic seats with nobody sitting in them, blocks of the stadium that looked like they'd been roped off for a game that didn't matter, rather than the first day of the biggest sporting event on the planet. This is not a logistics issue. This is not a scheduling quirk. This is the opening image of an empire that expanded beyond what it could sustain. And roughly 2,000 years ago, an empire on the other side of history already showed us exactly how this ends. The 2026 World Cup is what the Roman Empire warned us about. Rome, at its peak, around 117 AD under Emperor Trajan, was the largest contiguous empire the Western world had ever seen. It stretched from the rain-soaked hills of northern Britain to the deserts of Mesopotamia. It contained roughly 55 to 60 million people across 3 continents, governed by a single administrative system operating out of a single city. For nearly 2 centuries, the Roman Empire represented the most ambitious organizational project in human history. It built roads that connected every corner of its territory. It developed legal systems that governed populations who didn't share a language, a culture, or a god. It constructed arenas that held 50,000 spectators for events designed to demonstrate that the empire could provide not just governance, but spectacle. And then it collapsed. Not overnight. Not in a single dramatic moment. It collapsed the way every overextended empire collapses, slowly then all at once under the accumulated weight of decisions that prioritized growth over coherence, expansion over sustainability, and the appearance of power over the reality of structural integrity. FIFA, football's global governing body, has spent the last 2 decades following the Roman playbook with such precision that you'd think Gianni Infantino had a copy of Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall on his nightstand. The 2026 World Cup was supposed to be the crowning achievement of modern football, the biggest tournament ever staged, and in terms of raw numbers, it is. 48 teams, up from 32. 104 matches, up from 64. 3 host countries spanning the United States, Mexico, and Canada. 16 host cities spread across a landmass so vast that a fan following their team from group stage to final could easily travel further than the distance from London to Baghdad. The format has been redesigned, the schedule expanded, and the entire infrastructure of what a World Cup means has been scaled up to a size that no previous tournament has ever attempted. The Roman Empire didn't fall because it was attacked by a force stronger than itself. It fell because it grew beyond the point where its own systems could manage what it had built. The borders became too long to defend. The roads that once connected the empire became supply lines that drained its resources. The provinces that were supposed to generate wealth became liabilities that required more investment to maintain than they returned. The central administration in Rome, which once governed with efficiency and purpose, became bloated, corrupt, and increasingly disconnected from the people it claimed to serve. FIFA's expansion of the World Cup follows the identical logic. The jump from 32 to 48 teams wasn't driven by competitive necessity. It wasn't driven by a popular demand from fans who felt the tournament needed more matches. It was driven by commercial necessity. More teams means more games. More games means more broadcasting revenue. More broadcasting revenue means more money flowing into an organization that has already been investigated, indicted, and convicted on charges of institutional corruption that spanned decades and continents. The decision to expand was announced in 2017, just 2 years after the FBI arrested 14 FIFA officials and associates in a Zurich hotel at 6 in the morning. The arrests were part of an investigation that uncovered over $150 million in bribes related to the awarding of tournament hosting rights. The empire didn't pause to reflect on its structural failures. It didn't reform its governance or reduce its ambitions. It expanded further. It always expands further. That's what empires do until they can't. The Romans understood something about the relationship between spectacle and control that FIFA has adopted wholesale. The poet Juvenal coined the phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses. His argument was that the Roman populace, once engaged citizens of a republic who demanded accountability and political participation, had been reduced to a population that could be pacified as long as it was entertained and fed. The games at the Colosseum weren't just entertainment. They were a governance strategy. As long as the arena was full and the crowd was distracted, the failures of the administration could continue unchallenged. The 2026 World Cup is FIFA's Colosseum. The opening ceremony, the 104 matches, the spectacle of the world's greatest players competing across 3 nations, all of it is designed to generate enough excitement that the structural questions get buried underneath the noise. And for the most part, it works. When Messi takes the ball in an Argentina shirt for the last time, nobody is thinking about dynamic ticket pricing models. When a 19-year-old scores his first World Cup goal in front of 80,000 people, nobody is filing ethical complaints with the European Commission. But the empty seats broke the spell, because the one thing an empire cannot afford, the one image that undermines the entire projection of power, is a Colosseum that isn't full. Ticket prices for the 2026 World Cup range from roughly $140 for the cheapest group stage seats to nearly $8,700 for the final at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. England fans wanting seats behind the goal for their opening match against Croatia are paying $523 per ticket for a group stage match. Fan groups have filed formal complaints with the European Commission, accusing FIFA of abusing its monopoly position. Football supporters Europe called the pricing a monumental betrayal of the fans who actually generate the atmosphere that makes the tournament worth broadcasting in the first place. A fan wanting to attend one match in each round of the tournament, from group stage to final, would spend a minimum of $5,225 on tickets alone, before flights, before accommodation in cities where hotels have tripled their rates, before food or transport or any of the other costs that come with traveling across 3 countries and 16 cities. In FIFA's original 2018 bid document for the tournament, group stage tickets were projected to start at $21. 21. The gap between what was promised and what was delivered is not a miscalculation. It is the gap between what an empire says when it needs your support and what it does once it has your compliance. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote about a similar dynamic. He described how Rome would conquer a territory, promise prosperity and protection, extract resources and loyalty, and then gradually withdraw the benefits while increasing the demands. He wrote that the Romans create a wasteland and call it peace. FIFA promised the world an inclusive, accessible celebration of global football. What it delivered was a tournament where attending a single match in each round costs a minimum of $5,225, where hotel prices in host cities have been inflated beyond what working families can absorb, and where the most passionate supporters from South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia have been effectively priced out of participating in an event that is supposed to belong to them. The geographical reality of this tournament is its own Roman parallel. The distance between the northernmost host city, Vancouver, and the southernmost, Guadalajara, is over 3,800 kilometers. A team drawn into a group with matches in Seattle, Miami, and Mexico City would be traveling distances that European World Cups never required. The 2022 tournament in Qatar, for all its controversies, at least had the logistical advantage of compactness. Every stadium was within an hour's drive. The 2026 tournament has stadiums separated by 4-hour flights across 3 different countries with 3 different immigration systems. Rome's roads were supposed to connect the empire. Eventually, they just made it easier to see how far apart everything had drifted. The expansion to 48 teams has created a competitive problem that mirrors Rome's provincial dilution. When the empire was smaller, every territory within it mattered strategically. When it expanded to include territories that offered little strategic value, the overall quality of the empire's infrastructure declined because resources were being spread across a larger area without a proportional increase in capacity. The 2026 World Cup now includes nations that would not have qualified under the previous 32-team format. This is not an insult to those nations or their players. It is an observation that the tournament's competitive intensity has been diluted in service of a commercial model that requires more content to fill more broadcast slots to generate more revenue. The group stage of a 48-team World Cup contains matches that the global audience has very little emotional investment in. Those matches still require stadiums, infrastructure, security, and broadcasting resources. The empire grows. The quality per unit of territory declines. Here's what Rome's collapse teaches us about where FIFA is heading. The empire didn't recognize its own decline in real time. The senators in Rome continued passing legislation as if the system was functioning normally. The emperors continued building monuments and staging games and projecting power long after the substance behind that power had eroded. The decline was visible to the provinces, it was visible to the soldiers on the borders, it was visible to anyone who wasn't seated in the center of the administration. But the center itself was the last to know, because the center had built an information ecosystem in which admitting decline was structurally impossible. FIFA operates inside the same closed loop. Infantino stands at podiums and declares that this is the greatest World Cup ever. The official attendance figures claim near-capacity crowds while the cameras show blocks of empty seats. The revenue numbers will be presented as records because 104 matches across 48 teams will obviously generate more total revenue than 64 matches across 32. The same way an empire with twice the territory will always collect more total tax, even as the return per province declines. The metrics are designed to confirm the expansion, not evaluate it. The World Cup will still produce extraordinary football. It always does. Somewhere in this tournament, a teenager will score a goal that changes their life. A nation that has never won a knockout match will beat a traditional powerhouse, and the footage will be replayed for decades. Messi will take the ball in an Argentina shirt for what might be the last time, and an entire continent will hold its breath. The sport itself is not broken. The sport has never been broken. The sport is bigger than FIFA, bigger than the World Cup, bigger than any governing body that tries to claim ownership over something that belongs to the people who play it and the people who watch it. The sport is what survives after the empires that try to own it eventually collapse under their own ambition. Rome gave the world roads, law, architecture, and a template for organized civilization that we still use today. Rome also gave us the definitive case study in what happens when an institution mistakes its own growth for its own health, when the borders are too wide to defend, when the spectacles are too expensive for the citizens to attend, when the provinces exist to serve the capital rather than the other way around, when the official records say the Colosseum is full, but anyone with eyes can see that it isn't. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is the biggest tournament in the history of football. 48 teams, 16 cities, 3 countries, 104 matches, record revenue, record sponsorship deals, record everything on paper, and empty seats on opening day that tell you everything you need to know about the difference between an empire that is growing and an empire that is stretching. Rome couldn't tell the difference either. The senators kept celebrating, the monuments kept going up, the games kept being staged, and by the time anyone in power admitted that the roads were crumbling, the roads had already been crumbling for decades. They just hadn't bothered to look.